Morena, good morning. My name is Scott Matheson from Working In, and welcome to this webinar on the aged care sector and the future challenges that we are facing. I'm delighted to have a couple of panelists here, expert panelists in this area. First, Hon Tracey Martin, Chief Executive of the Aged Care Association of New Zealand. Tracey, welcome. If you could please just tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing now.
Kia ora. So I suppose my qualification for this role really comes out of being the Minister for Seniors from 2017 to 2020 and being the Minister that created the Better Later Lives strategy. I was also the Minister for Internal Affairs, the Minister for Children and Associate Minister of Education. I've been in the role, this is my 15th week, I believe, and am working quite quickly across all of the challenges and issues and making as much noise as possible while I do so.
And it's really good to hear a lot of noise coming out of this sector now and a lot of awareness growing. So we really appreciate you being on here today. Our other panelist is Samina, who's Samina Jaspal. She's based in India. Samina, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm one of the Senior Licensed Immigration Advisors with Working In. I also work very closely with employers within the healthcare sector in New Zealand. And like Scott said, I am based in India, so based in our Working In office here in India. And I'm a Kiwi. My father is Indian and mother is British, but grew up in New Zealand. So a Kiwi and a migrant. So this is a space that I really have a passion for and understand.
Thanks, Samina. That's excellent. And my name's Scott Matheson, and I'm the co-founder of Working In. We've been in business for over 20 years, helping New Zealand employers find skilled people around the world. What we do ethically, and we help employers find skills that they can't find locally. And so a lot of this webinar is around the future shortages and the pressures that are emerging in the aged care community. We do travel overseas a lot, and we do see what's happening, and we know that countries like Australia, the UK, Canada are building plans and are potentially ahead of where New Zealand is in terms of those frameworks, which is a concern to us. So part of the reason why we've done this webinar and asked Tracey Martin along is to really raise awareness of some of these critical shortages and pressures that we'll be facing all across the spectrum. So just to give you background, I'm going to run through a couple of slides. Probably the biggest issue that we face here in New Zealand is that in 1946, the baby boomers were born, and those first baby boomers turned 78 this year. As you can see on the left-hand side, that's our 1960, and that was our birth rate, which was around just under 4.5. And when the contraceptive pill was introduced, those rates plummeted. And now we're at about 1.65, 1.7. What does that mean? It means that for every 2 parents, we're not even reproducing another 2 children to take over. So we've got this demographic problem, an issue where our elderly are getting older, but we're not actually having enough young people to look after them. Our second graph looks at our population projections. And if you look at the black line, which is the lowest on the left-hand side in 2018, that's our 65-year plus cohort. And you can see that that's growing year on year on year as we have this aging population that we talk about. So another way of looking at this, because we've got 80 people turning 65 every day in New Zealand, is you can see that the green graph is the age 65 plus, but more concerning is the purple, which is the 85 plus graph. Going into the next sort of 5 years, we're getting those baby boomers coming through. In 2 years' time, they turn 80. And when they turn 80, we're sort of moving into this dementia scenario where there's more care required. And I think there's some really big questions about whether New Zealand is facing this reality. We've just had some really good discussions with Tracey prior to this webinar around how New Zealand's got their heads in the sand somewhat. So look, I'm not going to do all the talking. I really want Tracey to take the floor as much as possible. So Tracey, just to open this up, what do you see in your role as the CEO as the major issue facing New Zealand aged care over the next 10 years?
Oh, okay. So where would I start? So the first thing is the numbers. So just even basic provision, and that means the number of aged care facilities that we have that are going to be able to take in those of our elders who need residential care. And we need to understand that, I guess the other big problem I have is trying to get New Zealanders to actually accept that this is their reality and their future. We are all going to die one day. We are all getting older. We all want to live longer, but we have to accept the reality that at some stage we're going to start to wear out. And I also need to break what has been the concept inside New Zealanders' minds, which is what rest home care looks like. And that it was once upon a time a relatively capable senior in their 60s and 70s who needed a little bit of support, or their partner did, and everybody has a vision of them sitting in a in a lounge room having a cup of tea and a sandwich brought to them. The average age of New Zealanders entering residential care now is 85.
Wow.
And they are there for a period of time. They generally, they should be assessed as needing hospital level care, not rest home level care. 89% of those who are inside residential facilities have some form of cognitive decline. We are seeing an increase in drug and alcohol related psychogeriatric needs. And yet we have large parts of New Zealand that have no psychogeriatric care provision, and those that do are full. So there are waiting lists for psychogeriatric care. We don't have a country that is set up for the numbers. What is there? 170,000 New Zealanders by 2050 will have dementia. So we just don't have any of the physical capacity, the skills and staff capacity, the home and community capacity, and nobody is recognising that everybody's going to die. So nobody's talking about palliative care inside this conversation either, and the specialists needed to manage what is that passing away, both from the individual who needs it and the trauma of the family that is dealing with that grief.
So these are obviously massive issues for everybody who's watching, for everybody who's around us, because as you said quite bluntly, we're all going to pass away at some stage. So it actually impacts us all. Mm. And that's quite scary given the higher volume of people that are entering that age cohort. And we want to make sure, and we want to know as people, that we're going to be looked after if we get to that stage. Yeah. What we've just got a new government, 9 months into the job. I think that's right. What's their approach, and are they on board with this concept that we've got an aging population and putting efforts to prepare for this?
So there's some pros and cons to the new government, I suppose. One of the coalition partners, so New Zealand First, actually required that there be a Health Select Committee inquiry into our ability to care and provide sustainable support for those New Zealanders who are going to experience cognitive decline, so dementia and psychogeriatric. So the Health Select Committee, the submissions closed on Monday. And we held a webinar ourselves to make sure that our members understood what a select committee was, what an inquiry was compared to the passing of a bill, how to put in a submission about what is their reality, and to encourage them to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We spend a lot of time in this country not facing up to what is the truth of our provision in our aged care sector, who, let's be clear, is certified to a high standard. So there is nothing wrong with the care. The care that every New Zealander received is certified to the same high standard. Their staff are certified to the same high standard. So there is no issue at all with the level of care that is being certified. It is actually the capacity to get it. It is the capacity of the buildings to provide. Some of them are 50, 40 years old. So that's a good thing that has come out of this government. On the flip side, what we've got is a funding and delivery model review being run by Te Whatu Ora and a team called the Aging Well team, whose major driver is to save 200,000 hospital bed nights per year. So they want to try and ensure that our elders are not in hospital beds if they're not ill or if they don't need an operation or whatever. Why that's a negative is for a couple of reasons. One, they're doing it away from the people who actually provide the care. So they're designing something that will work for hospitals, but won't necessarily work for seniors and communities. And they're designing it to not only save hospital beds, but also save money. So not quite sure how that works when you've got a growing group of people who need care, how you're going to shrink what is the amount of money you spend in that area. But that's the drivers behind what they're doing. So, pros and cons.
And so from your perspective, you're putting together a paper of what this should look like in the future. I mean, that would be an absolutely massive job. Appreciate that, drawing on other countries' experiences, I guess, and the demographics that are ahead of us. What are you proposing generally that we should be doing here as a country?
So what my board has agreed for me to do is actually to start to pull together what I'm calling an army of allies. Which is those of us who walk across that continuum of care, both in home and community, residential care and palliative care, to design what will be a system that will work for the human being, but also work for to release pressure from hospitals and so on and so forth, because we accept that we need to do that. So I'm in the process of pulling that together and have already started to make those connections and started to book those workshops. We as an association offered to fund a cross-party educational tour with a member of New Zealand First, a member of National, a member of Labour, and I think that was all actually. I don't think we'd reached out to the Greens at that stage. And we had offered to fund that to go and have a look at the Australian model, because they, in the last 2 years, have implemented a different way of funding, a different way of delivering. They pulled together quite a lot of strands and had a ministerially led task force to do that very thing. Unfortunately, that was declined by the Associate Minister with responsibility for aged care. So what we are doing now then is we are bringing the CE of the aged and home and community care sector in Australia here to New Zealand to try and talk to as many members of Parliament as we can. And we would be putting pressure on all parts of government to try and force a ministerial task force that involves us, just as the Australian Minister for Aged Care did.
And so presumably the Australians are pretty happy with the model that they've got. What does that look like?
Well, first of all, I think they are reasonably happy. I mean, they've been working out the kinks. Nothing's ever perfect. They've had to delay what they call support at home, the new implementation of that, because it needed to be, it needed a longer period of time to design transition points. We continue to decline, so we can keep more of our 65 to 85-year-olds at home, but as long as we have, and we'll need a larger workforce to do that in the home and community sector, but we also need to recognise and find the continual assessment and transition points for them to come into residential care as they wear out, as they become more dependent. So they've had to delay that, but at this stage, they've got an independent pricing agency, for example, that provides an evidence cost-based price to government about what it costs to care for these individuals. Here in New Zealand, we have a pull a percentage out of the air and that's it type of a relationship with Te Whatu Ora. They pull the percentage and they tell us that's it. The other thing that they have is they just have a greater and closer working relationship between the home and community residential care and palliative care. We have been quite siloed up to this point.
Tracey, we've got some questions and sort of discussions just on the chat regarding hospices as well, and of hospice involvement in the plans for the future, and obviously also hospice concerns of obviously their patients or people, and they're going to be sicker. It's going to be more complex. And if you can give us any feedback on that.
So at this stage, I'm still to reach out to hospice. We are looking at a week in November, a day in November for the first meeting of the key peak bodies. And so hospice absolutely has to be in the room. I mean, they are the major provider of palliative care into the home. Although I would have to say that the cost of palliative care is also starting to affect hospice's capacity to deliver and support families in home, and also the beds that they have for individuals to go into a hospice facility as they pass away. So what our members are telling us is that they are receiving calls from hospice asking them to take into their facility a dying person. I'm being told that hospitals are discharging elders as well to go home and putting them into residential care facilities, and they die within 24 hours. So we've got some really interesting things happening in that palliative care space.
Okay, thank you. And look, I just note to anybody who's watching, if you do want to enter a question into the chat, we will respond to it. Or if you want to ask a question directly to Hon Tracey Martin or to Samina, please do. We've got the chat up in front of us and we're looking at that all the time. So, we want to make this as open as possible. And Tracey clearly has a huge amount of expertise and knowledge and is willing to share. So get into it. So I think the other thing, Tracey, is just from the population perspective, one of the biggest issues that keeps on coming up is how do we staff this? In an ideal world, if there was the funding that was required, how do we actually staff this aging population, and can we do that from within New Zealand by training more people and making it more enticing for younger people to come into this industry?
Well, I think those are things that we need to do as well. We need to. It's again because we as I guess as humanity constantly try to ignore what is our reality with regards to how we will age. We all avoid even thinking about who will care for us, or should we care for somebody else. Every 30-year-old needs to be thinking about this, right? Because the peak of this wave is actually in 2078. So every 30-year-old needs to concern themselves with how is this delivery model going to pan out and be there for them. So yes, we can certainly do more to, and I think ETU is doing some work around trying to build the concept of the value of caring for people, which, certain Indigenous nations have a much greater openness to that. Perhaps we Westerners are a little bit more self-absorbed, maybe, in our own way. But if we're talking, we cannot, with our current birth rate and with our current projections on workforce and age demographics, we cannot provide a workforce for this industry, let alone every other industry that we have in New Zealand that we need to keep working. So we need to be doing smarter immigration. And, a discussion that we were having just before was around looking for couples. We have multiple sectors who need skilled workers, although I would have to say there are parts of the aged care sector that don't require skilled workers. They require the right sort of person with the right sort of character who gives a damn about people. So some of our immigration settings block those individuals from coming into this country, and we need to have a sensible conversation about if we have a minimum wage legislated, why do we actually decide that somebody has to earn this over here before we will allow them to come into the country? But if they were born here, it's fine for them to earn this. And the same if you think about, I think it's healthcare assistants. If you are a New Zealander born here, you're not required to have 3 years worth of work experience or this particular qualification. You can start on a micro-credential pathway or an in-work sort of pathway. But we actually block individuals from coming into the country who don't meet that criteria.
Yeah, okay. So look, I think we might discuss the immigration thing in a little bit more detail a little bit later on, because as I said earlier, I think the Australians have got one up on us, and definitely sort of being involved in markets offshore, particularly India. It's incredible how active the NHS is, especially in southern India, in training young nurses up specifically for aged care. And incredibly high volumes with a lot of incentives.
Yeah.
And my concern as a country is that we're not making this as attractive enough for those offshore workers that we inevitably need, just because of the demographic fault line that we're heading towards. Not enough people to look after them. So there are a couple more questions though, so I'm going to go straight in. There's what are your thoughts on hospitals asking aged care facilities to admit patients under 65 as they're focused on reducing bed nights?
Yeah. So there's two sides to that, I suppose. At the moment, they ask our members to provide their facilities to people who are under 65, who've got some really complex requirements, but they don't fund us. They don't fund the facilities to the level that they're of the actual need. So at places I have members that do, because they're good people who know that there's nowhere else for these individuals go, will take these individuals in. Many of them have then become very difficult to manage inside their facilities because they have been inappropriately assessed by the NASCs, and because they wanted to shift them out of hospital, they have underplayed their complexities, and often it is around violent behaviour. So it's a challenge for our members. It's a challenge in that young persons with disability space, because that's it. Most of our facilities, our aged care facilities, are inappropriate for those 30 and 40-year-olds who have nowhere else to be. But right now, there's no plan I can see being created by government to make any shift in that area.
So talking about the planning then, the public-private partnerships is something that you've talked about. How do you envisage that rolling out?
Well, it would just be nice to have a conversation actually with the Minister for Infrastructure around recognising that aged care facilities, psychogeriatric units and dementia units are infrastructure for this country. Just in the same way, a much needed infrastructure, just in the same way that roading is. So, and what we know is report after report after report has highlighted the fact that the money that is paid by Te Whātua Ora to those who provide aged care means that they lose money every single day of the week. They have no money to maintain and grow the number of beds that we need for the current population, let alone the future population. So it's just another area that we're going to be trying to push forward on, is to at least have a conversation with the Minister for Infrastructure around what are the opportunities to create public-private partnerships for private capital to join with public capital to ensure that we have the facilities we need for the future population, particularly in psychogeriatric and dementia care.
Yeah, look, this is really interesting because the CEO of the CRL project taking place in Auckland was on One News recently talking about bipartisan agreements where both parties would agree to a long-term infrastructure plan and it would be locked in stone and different governments couldn't really alter on that because they both agreed to it in the first place. Do you see something similar being able to be done? Because this is essentially infrastructure, if that's what you're discussing.
Um, Well, that would be fantastic. And lots of people talk about, wouldn't it be great if we could just get all of the political parties to agree on stuff? Having been in political parties, it's very difficult to campaign during an election when you all agree. I'm not quite sure whether that is going to be possible. However, at the moment, I am in contact with all political parties in Parliament in an attempt to ensure we, offering our support around data and evidence for any policy development they might have that is around the aged care sector. Two political parties have accepted that opportunity, and we will work with their research units to show them the consequences of their policy. And if it's a negative consequence for New Zealand and for for New Zealanders, we will try and direct them to a more positive policy position. And because my goal is to have this issue, including things like public-private partnerships to create more capacity, including to have a task force that designs or already accepts what we have designed into every manifesto by 2026. There's about 139 weeks left till the last day there can be a general election in this country. The last day is the 17th of December, 2026. It's most likely to be at the end of October, beginning of November. So not a lot of time to make these changes.
No, not a lot of time. And the current shortages of beds and the future shortages of beds that you were mentioning before, do you know the numbers off the top of your head?
About 12,000 beds in the next decade that we will need. But one of the reasons why we're quite concerned about Te Whatu Ora's designing what they're designing is because they have articulated to us that they see only a small increase in dementia and zero increase or a flatlining of psychogeriatric. That is just not possible. So we don't know where their evidence is for that. I think you'll find that Alzheimer's New Zealand and Dementia New Zealand would refute that there's just a small increase in dementia in this country, and certainly we would refute that there is a flatlining of psychogeriatric care currently needed in New Zealand.
And so I guess this acknowledging that and agreeing that, that it's not flatline at all, then, where is the training? Where are the people? What are we going to do about that? Because that's a now issue.
That's right. So a couple of things. I mean, we are, first of all, we have to look offshore, but our sector, unfortunately, has some challenges when with migrant nurses that are coming from particular nations. Those challenges are the workplace. So many of the migrant nurses that have come into New Zealand are highly skilled. Nobody's questioning their skills. They absolutely meet the criteria, and the skills have been recognised. It's actually about that when you're a registered nurse inside an aged care facility, you predominantly work alone as a registered nurse with healthcare assistants and others in that workplace. So your critical thinking skills, your ability to have confidence in your immediate decision making, that's really important, as opposed to if you go into a hospital environment, there is quite a few other people around that you can check things with. So we were disturbed when, and are concerned when now the nurses organisation, sorry, I've lost my whatever that's called, but they shifted from the CAPS to OSCE.
Yeah.
So we've shifted from what was like, a number of weeks and sort of more, many more experiences to a number of days and so much less experiences. And so we're going to find it much more difficult to confidently place migrant nurses inside our care facilities because the settings do not recognise the workplace.
Yeah, so that's the nursing organisation, yes.
Yes, that's it. Sorry. Oh, and one
Super.
other thing though, I've spoken with both the workforce development councils and also with the CE of immigration about could we look at shifting the international student settings so that there was an opportunity for some in our sector to go guarantors for international students who wish to come in to do a nursing degree, a 3-year nursing degree. They're able to work 20 hours a week. The facility would guarantee that they would pay their the costs for their education, and that they would employ them post their qualification. That would create, so we would bring them in to do the degree. So it helps international education. They would be New Zealand trained nurses. They would understand New Zealand workforce and New Zealand society. Their English would be at a level that they were able to successfully and confidently enter the workplace. We think that there is an opportunity there that we're missing at the moment.
Wholeheartedly agree. I think that one of the issues that we've seen over the last 24 months since COVID and the AEWV visa is, a lot of people coming here being charged extortionate amounts of money, arriving in New Zealand, and just because they met the pay scale, started working or didn't work, and not necessarily had the relevant experience. So, Samina, I'll just give you a little bit of a break, Tracey, to have a sip of water. Thank you. There have been changes around the AEWV and healthcare assistance since April. Can you just sort of update everybody on what those are? Because there is now 3 years requirement, correct, of experience, prior experience.
Correct. So I'm sure everybody that is joining us today is very well aware of Immigration New Zealand's policies changing. Yes, in April there were some major changes, but we've seen changes continue after that fact. And one of those major changes within for the AEW was the 3 years of verifiable work experience, and we're talking about across all sectors here, regardless of the skill level of the role. And then what also another change that has been put in place is, depending on the skill level of role, is also the English language requirements that have been, I would say, reintroduced back in under the AEWV, something that we may all be familiar with from the early essential skills work visa. I think Tracey has touched on what that means if we're looking at the healthcare assistance roles. When we're looking at 3 years verifiable experience, that is now a lot higher than what may actually be required for the role that we need to fill as well in this space. I guess there are pros and cons to this, but when we're looking at the offshore skilled workforce, it does put in those restrictions going from a qualification or experienced within a healthcare facility, and the skills that often people have offshore are very high. But having that 3 years, and we're talking about verifiable, what does that mean from an immigration standpoint? That doesn't just mean that somebody has worked somewhere. Verifiable for Immigration New Zealand purposes means, do we have documents in place to support that? And for an employer in New Zealand, that can be a lot of work just to make sure that that person meets those requirements for Immigration New Zealand's purposes.
Samina, sorry, can I just ask
Yes.
Samina? See, I've run up against this before, and so how many aged care facilities are there in India?
In India, I would say actual aged care facilities, very few and far between. So the aged care in countries like India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and across Asia is very, very different from what we talk about when we talk about aged care in New Zealand. So the kind of work experience that people from this region would have is within hospitals. Within private and public hospitals. So yes, definitely dealing with aged patients, dementia, and across the board, but not necessarily in the kind of facilities like we have in New Zealand. Dedicated, whether it's home care, whether it's residential care or hospital care, it is very different. So that integration and understanding New Zealand, obviously, it takes that time as well.
So where I was going with that was because I ran into this with a case around the Kiribati community, for example, who were being I'm sorry about this, but Immigration New Zealand was removing them from the country. They said they had lied on their application forms, on their visa forms. And the area where it was where they asked them whether they were in a de facto relationship. And there's no such thing as a de facto relationship in Kiribati. So you're either married or you're living with somebody, but they don't have that phrase. And so they never ticked that box. And so then Immigration New Zealand said, well, you lied on your form because you were living together and we are now deporting you. And we had to have that changed by getting Immigration New Zealand to understand what was a cultural understanding in one country was not the same in another. Where I'm going with this is how the home and community care sector is going to need at least 8,000 more workers if Te Whatu Ora implements what they are designing to implement within a very short period of time. They do not need to be registered nurses or so on and so forth. They are home and community care workers. How is that going to be able to be evidenced in India, which doesn't have the similar society that we have in New Zealand?
I think she's frozen.
It's
so
not going to be able to be, basically, Scott. Sorry.
I just think I lost you there.
Yeah, you're back, Samina. Hi.
Did you hear that question about home and community care, Samina, and how they're going to need another 8,000 employees if Te Whatu Ora moves forward with their design, and yet they don't need to be a skilled workforce from that perspective. So not sure how that'd be evidenced.
Yeah, and I think that definitely is something that, to be able to manage as an employer, within the healthcare space, or even for Immigration New Zealand to understand that, is somewhere that we need a lot of work on.
Yeah, I would say, Tracey, to answer that question, normally if you can verify your experience as a nurse and you're coming in as an HCA, it's easier to take your experience and drop down rather than take experience and go up. So normally Immigration New Zealand would accept hospital care as evidence of being able to perform the role of an HCA if the job descriptions matched up enough. But it is an issue, and I think what you're bringing to the table here is micro credentials or level 4 credentials on landing, so that there's a whole lot of benefits in terms of induction into New Zealand ways, Māori language, Pacific understanding, and also our various ways that we are running our aged care different to their countries as well. And if that can be a mandatory part of the process, then I think you'd get more benefit out of each of those individuals, as you were discussing before.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing I would like to really discuss, because we've just seen from a commission done on the exploitation of workers. And I think this is a big issue for New Zealand, especially when we are trying to compete. We're very aware that New Zealand's reputation has been tarnished recently. And that's a lot to do with the exploitation of workers, especially those that have been charged, extortionate amounts in offshore markets. It's a major concern that people can pay 25, 35, up to $50,000, come to New Zealand and not have a job. Mainly this is in the construction industry, but absolutely we've seen it in the aged care community as well, and with some of these tri-party relationships. We think New Zealand needs better protection to ensure that we don't have a reputation, because there's a lot of news in India, for example, and the Middle East and the Philippines about this exploitation, and it's tarnishing our reputation. What's your view on that, Tracey, and how do we clean up our reputation so that we're seen as a country that has a future for these people?
So it's a fairly big question.
It's a big question. Sorry.
Ultimately, we need, like just across the board, we need to be more proactive with regard to investigating exploitation, with being more proactive about entering workplaces and checking rather than waiting to find a number of migrant workers who one has finally escaped and decided they're going to tell how 30 of them are living in a container at the back of a facility or something. And sorry, that's not an aged care, it's more horticulture. But I would say that what you've got there, what Tsunami has provided to your company is one of the major solutions. That what you have there is an individual who understands the culture and the nation in which she is working with migrants to come to a country where she understands the culture and nation of the place they are coming to. So she's able to make those judgments, not just about their skills, but about their capacity to fit into New Zealand society as a whole. And I think it's a fantastic model. I've also had a cousin who worked for the Australian Immigration Agency, and she was based at Tiawanga, and she used to do face-to-face interviews before COVID. They had to eyeball her as an Australian based in New Zealand. And explain themselves how they understood and how they could work with Australian culture. So I think we need to I think for me, I would like to see more situations where we have people who understand New Zealand, basically what Tsunami is doing, as opposed to in-country, slightly dodgy agents who get a whole lot of money.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a really important point, isn't it? Thank you. And it's not dissimilar to say the universities or the polytechnics that will go overseas and represent New Zealand Inc. And so you have New Zealanders either travelling or in market. Samina, you're in market and you see what some of these agents charge. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that solution that Tracey was talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Apologies for my connection. I think we've got some of our monsoon rain outside, and it's just affecting me a little bit. But yeah, what we're talking about here is those third-party or even fourth-party or five-party agencies where the skilled workforce are going through and paying exorbitant amount of money, thinking that they have a job, or even having somebody sort of assist them with the wrong kind of documentation, or even, to the point of fraudulent documentation, to get them to a country. And what it works both ways, obviously for the employer, but also for these people offshore. And we've already seen there are so many of them that have reached New Zealand and have not been able to even continue or work and have to go home. And it is also within the aged care area as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is...
Sorry, I hope I'm coming through clear.
No, it's the typhoon, the monsoon is probably interrupting, and we've only got a couple of minutes to go anyway. So, the basis of it is that what Samina and her team are doing are trying to take that middleman agent out of the market, because what we see up there is so much is done under the table, and we are so blinded by that in New Zealand until these people arrive, and then they've got these massive amounts of debt to agents up in India or wherever it might be. And we feel as though if we're talking directly to the market and working with nursing organisations or other preeminent bodies, then we can actually source people directly and work around the agents and avoid that kind of exploitation. And we think the aged care sector in New Zealand really needs to be aware of that. We think there's some real reputational damage that could be done, even if you inadvertently are bringing on people from offshore who are paying this sort of money. So, that's part of the solution. But really, we think that what some of the stuff that Tracey's talking about in terms of bringing people down allowing them to get further education before they start work will help improve the reputation of those people and allow them to be more diversified in their employment options in New Zealand as well. So we fully support anything around that education piece as well. And hopefully that would be part of any policy going forward. So Tracey, look, time's run out. I really appreciate the amount of effort that you put in and talking to everybody. Do you have any sort of final words to say to our audience today?
Only just keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, because this is nothing on what the noise we're going to be making. Basically, I'm working on a rumble that will become a roar in 2026. This issue needs to be front and centre for the 2026 election, and I want every New Zealander to be asking questions during that whole campaign about, so what's your plan to actually make sure that we have the workforce, the capacity, the beds, and the care for our elders.
We'll send out an email after this, Tracey, and we'll include your LinkedIn profile, and everybody can follow you. And then you can share that and keep the noise going. And thank you very much, Samina, for joining us from India earlier in the morning over there. Really appreciate your time and your thoughts and knowledge. So that's it from us.
Thanks, Tracey.
Thank you very much, both panelists. Really appreciate it. Kia ora, everybody. Goodbye.
Kia ora.